What is up, grinders? Welcome to, I believe, a free Ground and Pound podcast. I am your host, Mike Brown, aka H3 Buddha, here with Liam Picks Fights. Liam, mixed bag last week. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, but they had to stack this card. We have an Abu Dhabi card. Stacked isn't the right word. Let me just say some upper echelon fights on the main card, right? Some fighters moving towards titles, some guys moving outside and going to be retiring probably after perhaps a loss. But I see another high-scoring week. We have 13 fights. It's okay. We can deal with 13 fights. Overall thoughts on the card, and Sandhagen and Nurmagomedov. One of these guys going to get a title shot soon?
I think that's very possible, right? But it's also a division where, meritocracy isn't always the chief component of getting a title shot. Merab seemingly is the top contender, so fair play. They're giving the right guy the shot this time. But last time out, Chito Vera kind of plucked a little bit from lower in the rankings, coming off of a very close split decision win over a guy who can't buy a win right now in the UFC, unfortunately. So I think that it's an interesting fight. It's certainly going to tell us a lot about Umar Nurmagomedov and where he stacks up in the division. And for Corey Sandhagen, the book's kind of been out on where some of his problems are, right? Getting caught in that reactionary rear standing position, getting caught in the back take. I mean, that happened against Aljamain Sterling. It happened against TJ Dillashaw. So has he corrected that? That's kind of going to be the defining question of this fight, because if he hasn't, we sort of know what to expect with Umar. He's going to try and take advantage of that. And conversely, with Corey, he's got a very diverse offense. He's a very creative fighter. That's why he has so many fans, but he also has a big challenge in front of him.
Yeah, I mean, we do have heavyweights. We've got a woman's fight on the card. We've got lower weight classes. Should be some all-action fights in the first fight of the night. Buried down on this card. It's a rescheduled one. Cedric Dumas versus Dennis Tulilian. We'll give down the X's and O's on this one. We did break it down, a few weeks ago or even a month ago. Who knows? Time's flying. But Dumbass is minus 220. Come back on Tulilian, a plus 185. Definitely finish equity. I think we know that. There's Tulilian's been finished. He comes out hot sometimes. I like the inside the distance lines for both guys. I got to be honest. We have Cedric at plus 115, plus 260. That's not that bad for the price tag. When you look at the lineup builds this week, it's not the best and most comfortable week to build. So I think a guy like Tulilian can give you leverage. He's got a ceiling, a legitimate ceiling, if you can get an early finish. And, it gets you away from those middle range builds that might be very, very popular this week.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, my feeling on Tulilian since he arrived in the UFC is that this guy kind of stinks. He fought Kizriev, who's an undersized guy for the division, very talented though, and Kizriev mostly had his way with him on the mat. When the fight was standing, it obviously was a little bit dicier. That Tulilian's going to throw. He's going to be aggressive with his strikes. He just sells out with all offense. I don't think he is very defensively sound. I think he's there to be cracked. You look his win in the UFC, right? He's 1-4. Jamie Pickett, congratulations, fantastic win. A guy who really struggled to win UFC level fights. Jun Young Park exposed him on the mat very easily, dominated him, beat him up, took his back, finished him. Gregory Rodriguez got the fight to the ground and then absolutely beat the tar out of him. And that was a fight where a lot of people were saying, maybe those were illegal shots to the back of the head. I think he was just in a really compromised position. And Gregory Rodriguez has said, screw jiu-jitsu. I don't believe in that anymore. So then the Christian Leroy Duncan fight, we just saw Christian Leroy Duncan a little bit of a middle of the road guy. He's lost to the upper echelon guys that he's fought now in the UFC, talking about a Petrosian, talking about a Gregory Rodriguez, common opponent. And then you look, CLD was able to handle him. He was able to beat him up. He was able to deal more damage and put him away. And CLD hasn't been the most damaging fighter so far in his UFC run. So I think that overall, you just see Tulilian as a guy who's been finished multiple times in the UFC. And on the other side, Cedric Dumas has been finished in both of his UFC losses. So these guys are getting finished. I think the difference is you look at Cedric Dumas and Nursultan Ruziboev. I mean, in most commissions, that's a foul, right? They're going to stop it. They're going to give him a break. They're like, screw you, dude. And he just got poked in the eye and told to continue and beat up and finish there. And I had actually predicted Rusaboev, I think, to finish that fight in the first round because that's what he does, right? He either finishes the fight in the first round or it's a greasy decision, like we just saw in his most recent fight. But the wins he has, Abu Azaitar, Cody Brundage, not great wins. The loss to Josh Fremd has aged like sour milk. So I don't think that Dumas is somebody that you want to be supremely high on. The only thing I would note is that he has shown a better ground game in the UFC. When you look, he was able to take down his Aitar multiple times. He was able to take down Cody Brundage and dominate him on the mat despite his better wrestling credentials. He's got the long frame to do that. So I think that the guy who probably has more paths to victory in terms of mixing this up on the feet and on the ground is Dumas. But we've also just seen that Dumas has been exposed a little bit at the UFC level. It's a guy who can be finished. And again, that Fremd loss, I mean, he always says, like, if they let me fight him again, I'd beat him. But it's just like the way it went down, not a good look for his grappling. And the easiest path to beat Tilulian is to exploit his grappling. Dumas is still a work in progress there himself. But from what I've heard, his work ethic in terms of the jiu-jitsu is very strong.
I will say, terrible absorbing of strikes for Tilulian, but what if I only told you that he's got 1.76 strikes output for dumbass? It's like Dumas is not throwing a lot out there. Is it because of the grappling? And then that negative rate for Tilulian is concerning. 4.5 out, 6 absorbing, 73% takedown defense. So you think this one's going to score well as long as somebody dominates?
Well, I think that for the most part, what we've seen from Dumas is that he's won or lost his fights in the grappling so far in the UFC. And if that's the case here, I think he's going to win this one just because Tilulian is pretty darn bad in the grappling. However, if this fight is won or lost on the feet, that's where I think Tilulian becomes a very live underdog. I do think that we see nice head kicks. We see some good strikes from Dumas, but defensively he's quite open. He came up quickly on the South Florida regional scene. And I just don't know that he's like a fully, developed striker against, opponents that are competent at throwing back hard shots at him, and I think that he's gotten away with a lot because he's big, he's intimidating on the regional scene. And in the UFC, these guys aren't afraid of you.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest, this is the first fight of the night buried down. It's going to come down to what is the ownership for one of these two fighters. We move on to the next fight of the night. We're going to see Jai Herbert versus Rolando Bedoya. We have Mr. Herbert, a minus 140 favorite. Come back on Bedoya, a plus 120. This is a tricky one because I believe somebody is a Bedoya is his weight class in a different one. So something different here. I love both guys are somewhat the same inside the distance, plus 275 for both. Bedoya, not somebody I want to trust, but I also don't want to trust Jai Herbert. The chin has let him down. Is this another fight that perhaps to get to a optimal lineup would be volume striking or that finish equity? Because Herbert's fights can produce a little bit of a barn burner.
This is going to be my first underdog take, contrarian take, I suppose, of the week, right? And if you look at Tapology, 75% of people are expecting Jai Herbert to get this fight done. They're expecting him to win this fight. He's the more tenured UFC guy. If you look, he's fought the much better quality of competition overall. And there's nothing, you could say to take away from that, right? It's hats off to him. He's fought a tough quality of opposition. But the things that I would point to as, potential reasons to be skeptical of his upside in the UFC. He loses to Fares Ziam. I think that's a winnable fight for him on paper. Loses that fight. Okay, fair play. The draw with Ludovic Klein, I think that's another winnable fight, a fight that was within his grasp, ends up losing that one. Okay, close fight, no problem. Kyle Nelson is a guy that's been having a lot of success in the UFC down at 145. I think a lot of people are giving him credit. Wow, what a win over Kyle Nelson. But Kyle Nelson was undersized at 55. He had a lot of failures at 155. Then he went down to 145, started to have a lot more success. His physicality translated, his power translated much better. I think that's important to take in mind. Then we look at the fact that he went out there and fought Ilia Topuria, and he landed a great shot. I think that is the thing that is like the claim to fame of Jai Herbert's career. He almost put away Ilia Topuria, and there's, again, nothing you could say but hats off to you. I think Ilia was not taking him very seriously. I think he's like, I'm going to kill this guy soon, and then he got hit with a big shot. It woke him up. He said, I got to go right now. He went for takedowns. Then as soon as they're back on the feet, he put his hands on him, And guys, Jai Herbert has been on the receiving end of two of the most harrowing knockouts in the UFC. One of them caused a commentator to lose their job, okay? And the other one was the fight in question that we're talking about. Ilya Taporia hits him with the bing, boom, bat. Like, he just hits him with this combination that has him doing like dance moves out there, and then he hit the deck completely out cold. So I think that we've seen not only in the UFC against Trinaldo, but in the regional scene, Reese McKee, guys, the problem with Reese McKee in his UFC run is that he can't hurt anybody. He throws a million shots. He lands a million shots. He can't hurt nobody. And this guy, Jai Herbert, got put down by him in the first round. And I think that the other thing about Reese McKee is when he puts people away, it's a comeback in round 3. It's a comeback in round 2. He's got to, get you a little tired. Then he goes after you. A first-round knockout against Reese McKee, I don't think has aged very well based on what we've learned about Reese over time. So I just think I look at a guy like Rolando Bedoya, and number one, you can make an argument for him winning either of his first 2 UFC fights. Now, I think the Song Kanan fight is the one where I'd say more clear loss there. And by the way, judges agreed. Unanimous decision there. He wins the first round on all the judges' scorecards. Then you see on rounds 2 and 3, he gets dropped in both rounds. He loses both of those rounds. It was close on the volume, got dropped in both rounds. Then he says to himself, why am I out here fighting these big guys at 170? I could get a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more, athletic, a little bit more, serious body composition. He's a professional athlete, and he's out there. He's got a little bit of a thin layer of fat. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're a human being, you're going about life. That's natural. But when you're trying to be a professional cage fighter and every pound matters, and you see these guys manipulate their weight to try and get an advantage, yeah, it makes a big difference to go out there and instead of being at 170 against Chaos Williams, a guy who's knocking out 170ers with big shots, putting them in the box, this kid goes out there on short notice against this guy. He's got his hands up. He's throwing big shots. He's going to his leg kicks. He's landing in the pocket. He has shown multiple times in the UFC, 100-plus significant strike output. You've never seen such a thing from Jai Herbert. So when you look at what Jai's upside is in this fight, and the reason I think this is fantasy relevant, you'll like this, is maybe Jai Herbert can go out there and implement his wrestling game. He is still the longer guy. He has a lot of experience. Renegade BJJ. He's a guy that could go out there and try and implement that. But you look at his UFC resume, he's got 1 takedown. And granted, he's fought a good quality of competition. It's not like it's been easy pickings. Hanato Moicano, you're not going to take that guy down easy. He's a great jiu-jitsu player. But you just look at the list of guys that he's fought, and the Kyle Nelsons and some of these guys you could potentially take down. And he didn't really have a ton of success in the wrestling and grappling. So I say, okay, what is the real upside for him here? He's a very old fighter for the division, right? You got a guy in Rolando Bedoya. His back's against the wall. He needs this win right now. And he comes from a great camp. He's got another teammate fighting on this card, Elfs Brenner. So Shootbox Diego Lima, the head coach, will be there. His teammate will be there. They've got a team rolling out there together. They're both at 155, perfect training partners, perfect bodies to work together in camp. These seem like 2 guys that are peaking at the right time. Honestly, guys, I posted it on Twitter. The physical transformation of Rolando Bedoya is astounding from what he looked like when he got to the UFC, what he looked like in his last fight, to what he looks like today. He looks like a professional athlete now, and he's 27. So I think a guy who's going to throw 100 significant strikes at 27, and he's never been stopped before, against a guy who's been stopped many times against guys who have power and guys who don't, and a guy who's been out there against good quality opposition, which sometimes I think is the over bias that people will give to guys who have UFC resumes. Like, hey, he's been around here for a while, but he hasn't been winning the fights. He's 2-4-1 in the UFC. He's struggled to get wins. Granted, he has won when he was a favorite before, so maybe he could do it again. But I believe that Rolando Bedoya, a guy that the market struggled to price, he was a huge underdog against Chaos Williams. He closes out the round like plus 150 on the live market. Then you see in his last fight with Kenan Song, he closed out the fight like plus 200 on the live market, and in a fight where he was a minus 400 favorite pre-fight. So the market has no idea how to price this kid. I think it's probably a pick-em at worst here for this fight. I think Jai Herbert's not a guy that's clearing big favorite status in a lot of his fights. So let's find out. Great fight. And I think both these guys are going to bring it. But I just think at 36 years of age, Jai Herbert is on the back nine. I don't think he's long for the UFC personally. And I think that a guy like Rolando Bedoya on the opposite side is a guy that is going to try and stick around. Shootbox Diego Lima, good team. I think that he's going to get the win.
Yeah, a couple points from me. Bedoya is averaging 52.9 fantasy points per fight, and he does not even have that 30-point bonus for a win. You gave a 30-point bonus on 52.9. He's paying off his salary and more in this spot if he is able to hit that. Again, the problem I see, though, Liam, is I think he's going to be popular. I really do. We don't have ownership yet on Lineup HQ. Make sure you guys do check that out later on in the week here. I mean, we are on Thursday night. It'll be up probably tonight, if not tomorrow morning. I just am worried that he's just going to be mega chalk, right? So why not? If you say that there's a world where there's grappling or Herbert blanks him, if Herbert has like a 30-27 and kills off at lower ownership, nobody's going to want to play him, I don't think. And that would be the reason to play him, is know what you're signing up for, right? Maybe he's able to halt that forward output.
The one other thing to note is that Bedoya attempted a bunch of takedowns. I forgot to mention this in his welterweight fights, but they kind of just were like shucked off easily by big guys. I do wonder if he could maybe have more success, because his last finish before he came to the UFC was actually a Darce choke on the ground. He's a guy that's a purple belt under the Diego Lima system. So I would not be surprised if he tried to work his own ground game now that he's coming down from welterweight to 155.
Last thing, we went through this forever already, but it is a good, important fight for the context. Why didn't they book either of these for one, the Sphere for Bedoya? Probably because he's got 2 losses. And Herbert just last week. What are we doing here? Like, they just don't care. Nobody cares anymore. Is that it, Liam?
I think that it kind of just shows like maybe Jai Herbert doesn't move units. You know, he's a former Cage Warriors guy, but I think he's kind of just, you know, he's in the second fight of the night for a reason, despite a long UFC tenure. And on the other side, you know, Bedoya has to prove something, right?
Yeah.
He's getting another opportunity, but he's probably on the 3rd fight of a 4-fight deal. And, you know, he came in and did them a favor, lost a close fight. They gave him another shot. It was another close fight. So they're probably saying to him, hey, man, you got to go out there, do something definitive here. And frankly, Jai Herbert's an opponent that people have put away. They put a stamp on at times in the UFC. And we'll see if he can add his name to that list in his new weight class.
Ownership fight for sure on my end of things. Now we talk about women's MMA. I shake my head. You got to tell me if this is going to be ugly good for fantasy or ugly bad for fantasy. We have Victoria Dudakova versus Sam Hughes. We have Dudakova a -170 favorite. Comeback on Sam Hughes is a +145. Kind of in this same range we were just talking about with Herbert. We have Dudakova here, 8,500. Hughes coming back at 7,700. I think she might be the odd person out of this range. You're going to have a ton of love for Marlon Vera. You're going to have a ton of love for Brenner. You're going to have a ton of love for Bedoya. But Sam has actually kept her job in the UFC. I think people were kind of laughed her out, 3 straight losses and then turn things around. Obviously going to be like a 50-50 fighter, but I do like the fact that she can get control time. If you look at some of her ceiling wins, like the Elise Reed, 121 points, I don't look at her as like a huge high score, especially, against Dudakova, who also, unless she's running through somebody, like, throwing them down and then they break their arm, I'm not counting the 121 win for Dudakova. She's averaging 77 points, and that was against Frey, who I think she should have scored a hell of a lot more. I think this is one of those stay away spots if there's not going to be a lot of grappling. And that's my big thing, Liam.
This is not an easy fight for me to call. Sam Hughes at times in the past has shown she's willing to do whatever it takes to win. She will cheat. She will grab the gloves, whatever it takes. And she's got a strong will to win. On the Dudakova side, I don't think she's been altogether blowing your hair back, going to a close competitive decision with Jinyu Frey. Not very good, especially when you miss weight in that fight. And you look at what she's brought to the table. The Estela Nunes fight, again, is a nothing burger. It's not her fault, but it's just what could you possibly have learned from that fight? Maria Silva gassed out horribly on the Contender Series, and looking at her results since, she's 11-1. She's doing well over in KSW, but she's winning split decisions over there. So again, it's just not telling me like, okay, Dudakova is really ready for prime time. And Sam Hughes, the win over Jacqueline Amorim, I think will age very well. I talked about Amorim before her last fight. She was a +150 underdog, submitted Elise Reed before anybody knew what time it was. She has real upside as a dangerous player. And also we saw she corrected her cardio her second time out in the UFC. Sam Hughes has fought on pay-per-view. She's been in big spots before. I don't know how good it is for her to go out there and fly to Abu Dhabi, but she's been a real prospect test. Yasmin Waregi had to get a couple losses under her belt before she was able to pass the Sam Hughes test. And I do think she's got a little bit more athletic upside and power on the feet than a girl like Dudakova. I don't know that Dudakova can compete, with Sam Hughes as this fight gets dirtier, as this fight goes longer. But the question that I have ultimately is just, can Sam Hughes defend the takedowns well enough to make this a competitive fight? Because I do worry that she could just get grounded out here. Amarim was in a high pressure spot in front of like a big home crowd, and everybody thought she was going to finish. She went for the finish desperately, and when she didn't get it, she was gassed out. If Dudakova fights very conservatively and just maintains her gas, tries to take Sam Hughes down and neutralize her, that is a path to victory that we've seen before. But ultimately, I think there's more upside on the underdog here in Sam Hughes.
We certainly hope that Dudakova is in better health this fight. If people do not know, look into it. She didn't come in the best of shape last time, we will say, and only put up 77 points. And it's like, against Jin Frey, man, I still think that you should be putting up like 105, pushing the pace. But yeah, she didn't feel good there. Sam Hughes, yeah, I think the problem is it sticks out, right? On this slate, you look at all the different fights and you're like, okay, obviously there's another women's fight, Dern and Godinez later on, but this one sticks out like, if it's competitive, it's probably not going to be a lot of fantasy relevance. We move on to the next fight where we see a late notice Jordan Vucinic versus Goram Kutataladze. It's like amazing, all right? I can say Kutataladze. I can't say Vucinic. Yeah, see, I got it.
Vucinic.
Yeah, there we go. Jordan, right? Late notice, obviously going to be the underdog here. Goram a minus 235. Jordan's a plus 200. You're going to have to tell me about Jordan. I do know that there was some Twitter X sphere talk, people getting behind him as an underdog this week. It seems like, that money continues to come in on Goram. But I think everyone is also looking at Goram and going, man, you're coming off of technically, 2 straight losses. Ismagulov, a split. Brennar, the third, as a big favorite there. That was a real big letdown spot. And I'm looking at Marcin Held. I'm looking at his name on the Tapology. I'm like, he's not in the UFC. No, that was a grappling contest. But tell me about Jordan. Is this going to be an all-around banger? Because if it's going to be, the pace is going to be more like grapple or heavy striking, I'm going to have some interest. The problem is the prop market is pushing me and going to probably push the public away, Liam. Plus 230 inside the distance from Goram and plus 375 for Jordan.
This is an interesting fight to me. I was getting made fun of in the comment section on my guy Clint's video because I had said I really didn't know how to evaluate the talent of Goram Kutateladze. And I think that it's fair critique. I always believe in listening to criticism, and some people are getting after me because Goram is clearly a talented fighter, right? I think there's no doubt about that. But I do think the way I would rephrase that is perhaps what his upside is as a pro fighter. And the reason I say that, he's 32 years of age. You look at his record overall as a professional, he's 12-4. He's been finished twice as a professional, including his last contest against Elves Brenner. And I don't think he got knocked out per se, right? He didn't get put out cold. He got hit with a big shot and he decided he had had enough. He had been hit with a bunch of big shots in that fight. So I'm not calling him a quitter or anything like that. I'm just saying, there are other guys who I think may have tried to stay upright there and he realized, hey, I don't have it right now. I'm a beaten man right now and I'm going to, live to fight another day. And that's just what it was. And I think that when you look at the Damir Ismagulov fight, there's no shame in losing a fight with Damir Ismagulov. He's clearly a great fighter. But when you look at what Damir Ismagulov, ended his UFC career looking like, he didn't look like himself. He looked like a shell of himself, I would say, against Grant Dawson, for example. So I'm not sure what version of Damir Ismagulov he was fighting there, and he did end up coming up short in that fight. Then he wins a split decision over Mateusz Gamrot, and that's super impressive. except for the fact that, it was a super controversial fight. He didn't think he won it at the time. It was impressive that he fought him very close in that spot. But from all accounts, it seemed like Mateusz Gamrot was hurt going into that fight. That was the rumblings from his camp after the fact. And even still, I thought there was a pretty strong argument that Gamrot won that fight. So if that was the case, then this would be a guy who hasn't won a UFC fight. And, his most recent win is over Felipe Silva outside the UFC, a 9-5 fighter, a fine fighter, but a guy who went 1-2 in the UFC, not the highest level guy. So I struggled to say, like, all right, Guram can beat this level of guy. He's a fine fighter, but he seems to slow down over the course of 15 minutes. He seems like a guy who's very inactive. He's hard to book, right? You just go scroll through his Tapology page, and Al Sawadi had an injury, so no skin off his nose there. That's what brings in Vucenic in this spot. But he withdrew from a bout with Jamie Malarkey. He had an injury during a scheduled bout with Thiago Moises. He had an injury during a scheduled bout with Don Madge. He withdrew from another scheduled booking with Don Madge. So this is a guy that they've really struggled to get to the octagon, kind of like a Khamzat Chimaev, right? They're both out of the same camp. They both have struggled to make it to the cage. Now, to talk about the guy you're less familiar with, right? Jordan Vucenic. I've been watching a ton of his tape today to familiarize myself. His fights with Paul Hughes, I think, are a good encapsulation of what he can bring to the table, in terms of both skill and toughness, right? The first Paul Hughes fight, he was able to grit out a very close 3-round decision, very close split. And then they go to a championship fight, and Paul Hughes beat the crap out of him. No two ways about it. But what we saw there was a lot of toughness, a lot of heart. He was able to go out there and compete. He's a very savvy fighter. What I would say is, a lot of the things I like to do from a grappling standpoint, he likes to do. So there's a part of me that likes this guy just on instinct alone. He's got a lot of smart tactics. If he can grab the head and arm together, he will push somebody against the fence. And unlike Jessica Andrade, Amanda Lemos, he just starts ripping knees to the body, realizing that the opponent can't defend. That's how he was able to beat up Paul Hughes in their first matchup all those years back when they were both young prospects on the rise. And when you look at his recent run in Cage Warriors, he's been showing his physical dominance over his opponents. He's out there landing big low kicks, landing some heavy shots on the feet, getting the fight to the ground. And he's a physical problem for these guys on top. He's passing the guard. He's getting to good positions. Now, I think Guram Kutateladze is a pretty savvy wrestler, but he can be taken down. We have seen that in the past. Els Brenner was able to get him to the ground on a few occasions, if my memory serves. So there's definitely been times where his takedown defense has been tested. We've seen him submitted at a point in his career pre-UFC as well. Vucenic is a guy that I think is prepared for this fight. He had a fight very recently in Cage Warriors. I think he's going to be in good shape, but we've seen a lot of times, even talented prospects have letdowns in their first UFC fight. It's one thing to go make the start at the Apex after you had a Contender Series run, right? But it's a different thing when you go from a big crowd that's really behind you, and this guy was a crowd favorite in Cage Warriors. That's why they want this guy, in my opinion, on the roster. He's, got people doing like all these chants and stuff, right? But when you look at where he's at, he's not going to be the crowd favorite guy in all likelihood. And he's going into hostile territory on short notice to take on a guy who is very high level and who's had a lot of hard fights already in the UFC. So for Guram, this is kind of his back up against the wall. He needs this win right now. And for Vucenic, the one danger I would say to his game, takes too much damage on the feet. He's there to be hit. Paul Hughes almost knocked him out several times in their fight. He was too insistent on forcing the grappling there. Vucenic got both of his eyes busted up and cut. And when I was watching the tape today, that was the number one thing that stands out to me, is that Kutateladze, I think in the first 7.5 minutes, will be the sharper man on the feet. I think he will do more damage. I think he'll be able to prevent takedowns. For me, the fight gets interesting if Vucenic is able to extend it late and start putting pressure on him. We've seen it a number of times now. This guy just does not like to be in deep fights. I think that Els Brenner made him quit mentally. I do not think that he landed one punch that was like, this is the one, because he landed a shot and the guy went down. But I think that he had just broken him mentally from walking him down, saying all your best shots didn't put me down and I'm not going anywhere. And I think
volume.
Thanks anyways, I'm out of here. And he hasn't fought in over a year. So, Vucenic fought last week. this is a guy that's raring to get in the cage each and every time he can, and he's hungry for the opportunity. So for me, great fight. I would make the line slightly closer, but I understand why Guram's favored because I always talk about if somebody's going to win the first round at a high clip, I think you have to make them a favorite. I do not think Vucenic wins this first round at a high clip. I think it's going to be tough sledding for him early, but I do think he's live late.
I kind of hate that you say that he wears damage through Cynic because I feel like Kudalaji always visually, man, is always like getting hurt. It's like red face, bleeding. So if this thing ends up being a war,
both these guys throw a lot of elbows and they're both super Caucasian, man. They're going to be bleeding everywhere.
So, yeah, I know. So I'm just saying it's going to be one of those situations where which judge says, oh, this guy's bleeding more, it's him. I'm sniffing out like a split decision type prop. Just, I like to say that. But what does that mean for fantasy? Might not be the best target in the world if it ends up getting to the scorecards. We move on to one where we certainly hope we do not see the scorecards. If this fight goes to the scorecards, Liam, I would want to do a shoey in regards to fantasy and somehow they break 100 points because this is Shamil Gaziev versus Dontel Mays. Obviously I'll walk it back because obviously there's a world where they just gas each other out and they go to a decision, but Gaziev back in here after the setback, a minus 260 favorite, Mays a plus 220 underdog. All right, well, Gaziev last time out, main event favorite, Jair Rosenstruck, got him out of there. He was a minus 200 favorite, I believe, in that spot. Kind of let down a lot of people that were going for him. I do believe we may have said that Rosenstruck was in play there. But can we get back to Gaziev going out there and murdering people? Because this is one of those spots you can see what the UFC is doing. They're like, all right, here you go. Here's Dontel Mays as the sacrificial lamb. But for all intents and purposes, Mays isn't unconscious. He could still throw volume out there, right? I guess there's decision equity with Mays. Is it Gaziev or bust? Or are we looking at Mays a little bit for perhaps he's going to be lower? I think Gaziev's going to be higher owned just based on the inside the distance line.
Weird fight for me because I don't rate either one of these guys' games all that highly, but if I had to rate one of their games higher, it would probably be Gaziev. I just think he's a more natural athlete. Obviously the guy with more fight experience is Dontel Mays at the UFC level. He's been training with good guys. He's had a lot of UFC fights. So all those things are intangibles that go in his favor. But a guy who is a national level athlete in volleyball for Shamil Gaziev sounds silly, but then you see him go out there and fight a former professional video game player in Martin Budai, and it looks like night and day between their speed, their athleticism, their ability to move their bodies through space. And that's what you saw. And I think that Dontel Mays, when you give him an older opponent like an Andrei Arlovsky, when you give him somebody who's, a little bit less on the athletic side for heavyweight in Caio Machado, I think he's got a better chance there. Caio Machado relies on his technical jiu-jitsu and the fact he was fighting a lot of 50-year-olds in Canada, no disrespect, to have, a very solid record. But I think that when I'm looking at a guy like Dontel Mays, he hasn't impressed me all that much. The Augusto Sakai loss has not aged very well. Rodrigo Nascimento, 2 cracks at that one, didn't go well for him either time, and I don't rate Nascimento very highly either. The Hamdi fight I thought was hysterical. I told people I thought they were getting a little out over their skis with the Dontel Mays love, and Hamdi, another Olympic level athlete, was able to easily take him to the ground. On a number of occasions. And often Dontel Mays' undoing is his own fault, right? He makes really bad decisions. I thought the Ciryl Gane loss was comical and unforgivable, right? The way he got submitted in that fight via a fallback heel hook. I mean, geez, Louise, it was really a comedy special there. And he got submitted by Nascimento as well in a fight where he started to get landed on big. So I think that Shamil Gaziev hand speed should be his advantage here. He's got to work on not gassing himself out. So maybe we see a little bit more boring, composed version of himself. But honestly, I think he can win this fight with his boxing. And I wouldn't be surprised if he took down Dontel Mays either. it's just not a fight I feel very confident in because Gaziev stinks, right? If you go back and watch that last fight with Rosenstruck, there was one point he ran headfirst into the cage looking for a takedown, didn't make contact with his opponent, just ran headfirst into the cage. So he's not a prize, but I just think Dante May is a very average journeyman type character, and he's lost to worse guys than this before. Alan Crowder comes to mind in the past. So I think that Shamil Gaziev, last time out, he learned a lesson, which is if you spend it all early and you can't get takedowns, you're going to look really bad. But if he can get this fight to the ground, we've seen multiple times Dante Mays look for a way out, got submitted. And I think that Shamil Gaziev showed against Greg Velasco. He has some defensive and offensive awareness on the ground, defended the chokes, turned into him, got on top, and choked him. So I think that Shamil Gaziev might get another submission under his belt against Dante Mays.
Is Mays at Jackson Winks? I think.
I think so. Still hurting John Jones, putting him out, delaying the Stipe fight for a year.
Yeah. It's like not the best camp in the world. Obviously, they're going to put a lot of guys.
If he wins this fight, he's getting Jailton Almeida next. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, get people back in the win column, right? That's what we call a jobber in the business. But, the problem for me is like it's minus 145 for Gaziev. There are some stronger targets and then some grapple interesting outliers around him. So I very, very much am going to consider this as an ownership play. I can't wait to talk about, I believe, which is the next fight, because Kyle Fernandez is like, one of the better inside the distance lines. Heck, he's one of the best money lines on the whole slate, minus 400. We'll just pivot right to it. Versus Mohamed Yahya. We have Yahya plus 300 underdog. I talked about it, minus 170 inside the distance for Fernandez. So, I wonder if people are going to head towards Fernandez more because of that, or if people are going to be going, all right, we have two heavyweights. Give me the heavyweight that can get a finish in the first round. I don't care about the extra, quarter to pay for juice for the inside the distance. And Yahya is one of those guys where it almost looked like a permanent fade for a lot of people coming into the UFC against anybody he was going to come in there against. They were going to try to fade him. Trevor Peek, getting a loss against Trevor Peek isn't the worst thing in the world. But when Trevor Peek is taking you down 4 times, that's where the problem lies, right? Because we have Fernandez who gets into his first fight, a split decision. But I mean, D. Casey had 8.5 minutes of control time. How does that age? Like, why is the line so in favor of Fernandez? And I'm not going to say their guy, right? Yeah. But like, he's from the area. Is he not?
UAE.
Yeah, Abu Dhabi. I'm not great with the maps. You can take it over from here. I'm just gonna say the line surprises me.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Listen, the one thing about Yahya that seems to be a glaring weakness, especially from his past, is his submission defense, right? Dan Collins, an older guy, was able to go out there, submit him back in 2020, made it look pretty elementary with his Darce choke finish. The second round finish for Gavin Hughes as well in Bellator back in 2019. So you've seen his grappling is just like his weakest point of his game. Kawe Fernandez, though, is a guy that has no real relevant submission victories on his resume. He's got 2 armbar wins. So, maybe he could go out there and hit an armbar, right? Obviously it's possible, but pretty low percentage submission. And you look at the guys that he hit it against. 1-0, Emmanuel Sousa ended his career at 1-1, never fought again as a professional. Evandro Barbosa ended, I believe, his career as a 10-4 professional. He's currently 40 years of age. So I think that you look at some of his wins, and they're okay. He's certainly got power with his kicks, right? I do think he's also capable of winning this fight via knockout. That accounts for the inside the distance line. He's got powerful kicks. We have seen Yahya put away with strikes before. We've seen him hit with big strikes against Trevor Peek as well. But when I look at that matchup, would Trevor Peek putting away a guy like Kawe Fernandez really stun people? Because I think that's very possible. Kawe Fernandez, he's gone to split decision against Mark Diakese. He went to a unanimous decision loss against Luan Sardina, and that's an undefeated fighter, so no skin off his nose there. I think that's a fine loss. The Mark Diakese loss, he's an experienced UFC guy, but he only became a wrestler and grappler in the later stages of his career. And he was having no issues getting takedowns throughout that fight. There was, I think, one time in round 1 when Fernandez was able to work back to his feet, but then it became much easier to hold him down as the fight got extended. He does not have great cardio. So I think he is a candidate to get jobbed out on the cards if this goes the distance, 100%. And I also just don't really believe in his upside hugely because I think Mark Diakese is a very average guy. Look at how somebody like Joel Alvarez was able to handle Mark Diakese. After Mark started wrestling and grappling desperately, he started putting himself in really bad positions, and we didn't see Cowboy Fernandez capable of capitalizing on anything like that. So let's see if he has a better showing here, but I'm not sure what I've seen from him that would justify a minus 400 type status. And if you go through the Tapology records of the guys that he fought, most of them ended up with terrible careers. So it's not to say that they're not good fighters. Like I said, one loss to an undefeated fighter still to this day. Nothing you could take away from him for that. But a lot of the guys he beat were fraudulent. So let's just see how he turns out against a guy who hasn't looked very good, but at least has been around the scene for a long time in top promotions, Bellator, and now the UFC. And like we said, he's the local guy. If anybody's going to get the, oh my God, how did they score it for him on the night? I think Muhammad Yahya is a great candidate. Fading Muhammad in the desert hasn't been a plus EV strategy for me, certainly.
Yep. Yeah. I also sniffed it out. And we're not saying it's a lock by any stretch of the imagination, but when the number's off and it's 6,900, I mean, he can fall his way, just trip his way into some fantasy points, right? The pace is going to be there that they think that there is from the Vegas side of things. I think it's an interesting play. I just wish there was more leverage to it, right? I wish he could just kill off that Fernandez ownership with, a first round knockout, because that's going to be where it comes into play for us big time. I just worry about if it is a split decision, maybe it's not going to be the best scoring fight in the world, but perhaps he is the guy that, gets you to the promised land. You win all of the monies. You've seen our podcast. How would you spend that money, Liam? I think you would maybe try our RotoGrinders Premium. We've got an option for whatever level you guys want to get in on, and that's try a 6-month combo subscription at an exclusive price of $469.99. Yes, that's a lot of money, but you're saving $250 instead of buying all 6 individual months of combo premium. If you're not a fan of that one, you can definitely get your toes in with a combo premium for $120. Those of you that want to test a run before the buying the dip their toes into the water with a 3-day pass for $19.99. Check the link in the description for more information. Kind of butchered that. Essentially what I'm saying, you're getting a lot of money off if you're trying to buy 6 months. And there's a lot of tools. Football's right here. It's here. It's starting tonight, Liam, as we are recording this podcast. Wild to think of, but preseason is starting. We move on to the next fight of the night, where we see Azamat Murzakanov versus Alonzo Menifield. Finish equity, like the alerts are going off in my brain. Finish equity for days, but the problem is pace might slow down the deeper the fight goes. That's where I would be worried. We have Murzakanov a minus 200 favorite, Menifield plus 170 range. What are you thinking on this? Is it really glued to finish equity here? Is there any outs to a 30-27 to get us out? Because the problem for me is price, right? You look at 8,700 for Murzakanov. He's almost priced off of that upper echelon of fighters. And then you look at Menifield. I'd be more comfortable putting Menifield, but I'm not ever comfortable with putting him in my lineups.
I mean, we just saw maybe the worst game plan of all time from Alonzo Menifield in his last fight. And that was not very long ago, right? 2 months and 2 weeks ago, he just sprints at Carlos Zolberg. And not a sprint where he was, pursuing a takedown or something that would have been intelligent, right? Just like looking for big punches upstairs with his chin out there on a silver platter. And, to get put down like that and make a 2-month turnaround for me makes no sense, right? Like I just wouldn't do that. I wouldn't allow my athlete to do that. If I was a coach, personally, I would be saying, 6 months out of the cage after getting knocked out in the first round. But in any case, they're not doing that. And so you've got a guy in Azamat Murzakanov who has 9 wins by knockout, a win by submission on his resume. He's not a fish out of water on the ground, a guy that has takedowns at the UFC level, a guy that can go out there and wrestle. So I don't think Alonzo Menifield has a ton of huge advantages here. Can he win the fight by knockout? Sure. I mean, he's a dangerous guy. He's got power in his hands. He's a willing, committed UFC fighter. He's been there for a long time. But frankly, I just don't rate Alonzo Menifield's resume very high. He's 8-4-1 in the UFC. His wins over Dustin Jacoby was extremely close. Very close fight. He landed a couple big bombs that changed the fight. He was getting outlanded on the numbers pretty routinely there. He beat Jimmy Crute, who's no longer competitive with the UFC. He beat Misha Serkinov. Same thing could be said. He beat Askar Mozarov, a literal fraud. He lost to William Knight. And guys, that's the fight that should tell you everything you need to know about this guy. There are times when he's just not himself, goes out there, gets pushed around in round 3 along the fence line with William Knight, to the point where William Knight attempting punches in a forward motion got him the decision win. He didn't land a single strike. He still won the round. It's just like Alonzo Menifield can throw away winnable fights, much less a fight like Carlos Ulberg, a high-pressure fight, goes out there with a career-worst showing, a career-worst game plan, a guy who really hasn't shown me much evolution over his UFC career. Beating Fabio Sharon and Ed Herman, those are kind of gimme wins. Then he loses to OSP. Guys, OSP was a dog at the time. I bet him in that fight. He went out there and just went bing, and just hit him with a left hook that Alonzo never saw coming multiple times, and that was the end of the fight. So I just think of Alonzo as a guy who's going to struggle with southpaws, as a guy who's going to struggle against other people that know how to wrestle and grapple. He's a big physical guy. He's got some power, but I just don't really rate his game, and I think Azamat is a better fighter. So I think he's going to win this fight. I think he's got more ways to do it.
My question is early, or do you think it's going to be Azamat's already got 2 third-round finishes, and Liam, they haven't scored the best, 72 and 96. I still think you're looking with 13 fights for 100-plus points. The pace isn't going to be there, I don't think, right? If it's a third-round finish again for Murzakanov, would you agree?
Yeah, Murzakanov can be a little bit low volume if I had to make a criticism, but he's a guy that kind of just knows, like, once I find my range, I'm going to kill you. And that's sort of what we've seen from him so far in the UFC. Obviously, Dustin Jacoby, that fight went the distance. Dustin Jacoby's been a very difficult guy to put away over the course of his career, particularly in the mixed martial arts side of things. So I think of a guy like Murzakanov as a dangerous finisher. He's had health problems, stuff like that outside the cage. You always wonder, is he going to be the same guy? But I think that if he shows up looking like himself, he's just a better fighter than Alonzo Menifield.
Sometimes that's all it takes, and fantasy points will come in bunches, especially if you're getting multiple knockdowns. We move on to, I'd say, probably one of the most fun fights on the whole entire slate. We have Joel Alvarez versus Elvis Brenner. We have Mr. Alvarez, a minus 170 range favorite. It's all over the place. There's some minus 190s out there still. Brenner is a plus 145 underdog. And I say fun because I really hope it's just scramble fest. I hope they hit the mat. I hope they hit the mat early and often, because I think there's going to be a world where there's just a bunch of points to be scored. I think the pace is going to be here. You look at Brenner's fights, he's done nothing but cause chaos. His loss, 56 points against Uralbai. I think that's going to age very well later on. Almost won that fight, to be fair, with his pressure. You talked about the Goram earlier. In the third round, comes on strong. I will say Alvarez is a guy that I think once you hurt him, you just he lays off that gas. So I wonder about path of victory for him. Like, is it going to be finish or bust? Because all he's done since the Ismagulov, his debut, is get finished or finish people. I think this is a fantastic target. Which side are you looking at? Or perhaps even both. If you're playing multiple lineups, you probably want a piece of it.
Yeah, I certainly think so. Joel Alvarez has proven he's a dangerous finisher. He can go out there and put people away. He's got, multiple ways to do it. He can go out there and put people away with his elbows, his knees, his hands, his kicks on the feet. He's a dangerous striker. He's also a guy who's got excellent guillotines, good triangle chokes. He's got length. He's got an ability to create dangerous submissions. And if you got a guy like that on your back, it's going to be a long night at the office, because he's got so much length. He can continue to maneuver around you. That being said, I've been extremely impressed with Elves Brenner, and one of the worst financial opportunities I've ever missed is this guy at plus 500 his first couple UFC fights, because you know what to expect from a guy like Elves Brenner. He's going to bring the pressure, he's going to bring the pace, he's going to try and get in somebody's face, throw strikes, attack, and also he's not afraid to mix it up on the ground with just about anybody from what it looks like. When you see this guy out there with Mirtabek Orobai, a guy I really respect for what he can do on the mat and the pressure he brings, he doesn't beat people with a super sophisticated offense. It's, I'm going to put you to the ground. I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to punch you in your face a bunch of times, and you're going to quit. You're going to eventually give it up to me and say, hey, I don't want this anymore. Please leave me alone. And that was what he didn't do, right? Elves Brenner did everything but that. He got beat up a little bit in that fight, and I thought he was going to, but he showed even more mettle and toughness than I expected, because there was a lot of times when he would scramble, reverse position, like you said, create these moments, these opportunities. The one thing I could say about Joel Alvarez that's not a positive at all, in my humble opinion, he's not a control wrestler. He's not a control grappler. He's one of these guys that I would say is willing, able to pull guard and create some situations and some opportunities, but that could also backfire big time, right? Because the danger is, I had said before the Arman Sarukian fight, I was like, guys, I'm going deep on Arman. I was like 5 units on Arman Sarukian, bet the inside the distance, plus 175. And people were telling me, dude, like Joel Alvarez so dangerous on the ground, like Arman's so small. Don't you see the size difference? I was like, guys, once you're on top and bottom, it doesn't matter how big you are. Then it matters the fact that you're stuck underneath. And when you're long, right, it makes it a little less likely that you're going to be strong. And so he is a pretty strong guy. He cuts a ton of weight, but he emaciates himself, in my humble opinion, to cut down to this weight. So he has a huge cut. He's dealt with a lot of injuries, stuff outside the cage. And you just look at his resume of wins. Every one of these guys is a freaking retiree, except for Thiago Moises. And I don't mean that to be rude. I just mean that in terms of, like, literally, they don't fight no more. Danilo Belluardo and freaking Joe Duffy. Joe Duffy never fought again after that fight in mixed martial arts in the UFC. So it's just like these guys like went out there, they lost the fight. They're like, hey, thanks anyway. Good matchup. And he's a dangerous guy. We know that. But when he fought good guys, Demiris Magulov taught him what a jab was, beat him around the head, neck, and chest. And then we've also seen when he goes out there against a guy like Arman Sarukian, it's one thing to lose to Arman, right? We've seen guys lose to Arman, have really competitive fights. Matt Frivola, Charles Oliveira. He got assaulted physically. He got beat up. Guys, it was a brutal, brutal beatdown. He was holding him down, elbow, elbow, elbow. And I had said precisely what was going to take place there. And so I can't say with as much certainty that Elves Brenner is going to do that. He's not Arman Sarukian. His wrestling's not as consistent. His takedowns aren't as consistent. But what I can tell you is this guy's scrambling is crazy. Against Kuta Deladze, it was crazy. Against, what's his name that we were just talking about? Million times. I have to pull it up now in Tapology. I can't believe my brain just went from knowing it to forgetting it in 2 seconds. Orobai. Thank you. But okay. Orobai and Kuta Deladze, he had crazy scrambles with both of those guys. And Zubaira Tuhugov, another guy who could create scrambles, wasn't able to do virtually anything. Kurt Hollabaugh was not able to put away Kanan Khrushchevsky when he was on, no cardio late in the fight. Meanwhile, Els Brenner said, hold this, and then he face planted him in the middle of the octagon. So he's got power in his hands. We know that. He's willing to throw down, even after he gets hit and hurt, right? Kuta Deladze, what was the difference? They both landed huge shots. They both got hurt. One guy stayed down. One guy kept getting back up. That's the only difference in the fight as far as I saw it. And when you look at Els Brenner, I think that the way he loses this fight is he gets knocked out in the first round because he does leave his chin up as he's exiting exchanges. We know Joel Alvarez will slam that elbow. That is exactly what Kuta Deladze looked to do off the break and landed successfully a few times. So there's a path for Joel Alvarez here. But Thiago Moises is the opposite of Els Brenner for me when it comes to their reaction to getting hit. Els Brenner gets hit, sees his own blood, and goes, I'm going to kill you. And Thiago Moises sees his own blood and goes, yo, this is nothing like jiu-jitsu. Get me out of here. And that's just a different reaction. So for me, I want the assassin Els Brenner because I think he's more likely to control the fight with top position.
Early look ownership. Alvarez, 43%. Folks, you broke it down. Elvis Brenner will continue. So there will be a world where the Alvarez backers at 43% will be like, oh, yay, I got there. Like, it was a great play. But just know it's because of Brenner that's going to be in the face, pushing the pace, going forward. 11%.
Well, Alvarez does the same, but I'm just thinking that there's probably not a high percentage chance that Alvarez is getting volume takedowns here. Whereas if Brenner takes him down every round and gets 13 minutes of control, that's a plausible world to me. I don't see that as the outcome. I think he's a little too violent for that, but I think that late in a round to win it, to edge it out, he will go to takedown. He will go for those positions. And the main concern I have is just Alvarez early, because I do think he will slow down over the course of this fight. It's impossible to have everything work your way all at once. And with that size comes a drop off, in my opinion, in cardio. That's why he's never won a decision. He's going out there to kill or be killed.
And people like to back that 43% early on here on Thursday evening, and Brenner's going to be 11%. It's going to be easy for me or anybody else that has multiple lineups to get over the field on him if you want to go with that side of things. We move on to the next fight of the night, where we see Mackenzie Dern versus Lupi Godinez. We have nearly a pick on -115 for Dern, -105 for Godinez. This is one of those situations where Mackenzie Dern's inside the distance is always going to be like a strong look early on in the week. I think it opened a +175. At least people are getting a little bit wise to it now, because it's up to a +225. And I think, everybody knows, right? She's got the grappling. She doesn't have the best offensive takedowns. Even still, it's just she rarely gets multiple takedowns. It would probably be through guard pulling. Her striking is evolving. But what's got to give, man? Because Lupi can get 100+ significant strikes in fights. She has been offensive wrestling in the past. I assume she doesn't want to go to the mat here. Did things just correct too much so there's not a lot of fantasy equity? Or do you see a world where either of these ladies can really open up the slate? Because we're looking at nearly the same ownership. We have Dern 18%, 14% for Lupi.
This is a fight where I look at Mackenzie Dern as the fighter who, she's coming into this fight with her mind kind of in a couple different places. She's preparing for a grappling match as well in a couple of weeks. So I wonder if that's taken anything away from her preparation for this fight. She looks physically like she's in great shape. I think that's important. And, looking at her previous losses, Amanda Lemos is a girl that can definitely be exploited in the grappling, but you need to be proactive. You need to be able to wrestle her. You need to be able to take her down. Mackenzie had some moments of success in that fight, but she's really not a primary top player grappler. So a lot of what she needs to do is create, dynamic scrambles where she's able to latch onto something and then finish the fight. But we've seen a number of women, especially strong women, negate some of her offense. We saw, for example, Tisha Torres basically hold on in a Kimura for the duration of the round and just ride it out in an uncomfortable power Kimura type situation. So I think of, what Mackenzie Dern was able to do to Angela Hill as her upside. She can go out there, and when she's on top of women, maybe she can't submit them. Boy, oh boy, she can land some ground and pound. She can do a lot of damage. And, the KO at that point in her career was 25-1. We haven't seen those kind of numbers since, I don't believe. So I just think of, Mackenzie as a girl that's shown she's got some offense striking, but she's there to be hit on the feet. She got hit so badly in her last fight against Lemos, the fight could have easily been stopped. The referee looked like he was going to intervene. Mackenzie was able to move just enough, keep him from stopping the fight. But again, that was very, very close to TKO. So that would have been 2 straight knockout losses. Now she's favored coming into this fight. That's an interesting look here. I do think that Lupi Godinez has pretty solid wrestling. I don't think she'll be easy to out wrestle for Dern, but she's an idiot, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just mean in terms of fight IQ, right? Outside the cage, she might be a Rhodes Scholar. Inside the cage, she does really dumb things sometimes. And the fact that she went out there and lost to Angela Hill, that's a winnable fight, it seems like, on paper for a Lupi Godinez. She wasn't able to get it done there against a common opponent who Mackenzie Dern took her down, did anything she wanted, beat her up on the feet and on the ground. Then you look at the Verna Jandiroba fight, right? And again, that's another spot where could she have kept that fight on the feet? Probably. Could she have won that fight on the feet? I think so. Why'd she take it to the ground? Why'd she look, to get into those positions? Maybe it's just force of habit. Maybe it's just what you train every day, getting into these wrestling spots. She can't get it out of her head, but she's exchanging leg locks with a BJJ champion. It's just like that's never going to come out looking like roses unless you win the fight. Right. And she lost that fight. And now Verna is the one who's going to fight for the title. So she's put herself back a few times in the career. Luana Carolina, winnable opponent. She took it in suboptimal scenario. She lost the fight. Her corner is typically her sister, who's now in the Olympic Games for Canada. for wrestling. So she's not going to be in her corner. Could that affect her emotionally? Could that affect her game plan? Could that affect her, corner? I don't know. Like, there's just some questions I have coming into this fight. I have to ever so slightly lean towards Mackenzie Dern because I do think Loopy is more likely to make one mistake and get finished in this fight. However, if this fight goes the distance, I think more often than not, that means that, Loopy Godinez probably kept it at distance, landed better shots in the boxing. I think she's a little bit more active and a little bit more assertive with her boxing these days than Mackenzie Dern. But Mackenzie is also a girl that shows up in different form. I think if the Mackenzie that showed up against Angela Hill showed up against Amanda Lemos, she might have had a chance to win that fight, and it was competitive. But I ultimately just think we've seen a pretty diminished version, a regression from Mackenzie Dern her last few fights. Jason Perillo was not in her corner. I believe he's back in her corner for this fight. But I'm also thinking to myself, how much have they really worked together? If she's doing a jiu-jitsu event in 2 weeks, I don't know. So this fight for me is like red flags all over the place.
It's an article fight. Make sure you check out Liam's article on the site. Get behind that paywall. Check out every single fight on this card broken down. It's tricky because, we have 13 fights. If you're playing one of these ones, you're going to have it go right for you because there are better targets, but you could see either one scoring. Like you said, at any time, Dern could rip a limb off. That's damn well possible. The volume striking from Godinez is there. Dern, like you said, what was the last fight out there against Lemos and Andrade? Lots of points. If you're giving up a lot of points, that's not good either, right? Definitely their price range is why I'm interested. The ownership is probably pretty accurate because you need a lot of things to go right to have this be the fight to lead you to the promised land. We move to the next fight. Last thing. Why is Loopy not on the Sphere? I mean, that would have been a minus. I would have lost all my money. If they had a betting board about who they want on the Sphere, I'd have auto clicked the minus 500 on Loopy. I would have been out all the money because I would have imagined they would have wanted to get behind her. And potentially if they thought she could beat Dern, that's why they would have done it, right? Another new star. We move to the next fight, though, where why are we still doing this? Tony Ferguson versus Michael Chiesa. We have Michael Chiesa minus 650 favorite. Comeback on Tony Ferguson, a plus 465. What is there to say, Liam? A million straight losses for Tony. Michael Chiesa gets an opportunity here to get right. 3 straight losses for Mike. A guy who is a jiu-jitsu guy, right? And who has been getting finished through that path. Darce choke twice. Is this where we see the Darce choke come back, Tony? Totally sarcastic, but I mean, I don't like this fight. I think there's a lot of paths that this fight doesn't score well, and obviously there's a lot of paths where it scores well. So, what are you looking at? Ownership Ferguson 5% makes a hell of a lot of sense. Chiesa 32%. It's going to be lower because he's plus 110 inside the distance, Liam. So I don't think people are going to want to go here for fantasy. Basically because he's going to go to a decision. It's not going to be that finish equity. Why? Why are we doing this? Even Dina said last time, nope, Tony's not going to get another one. Did Chiesa talk him into this? Who did? Why?
Michael Chiesa has never won a fight via strikes. That is why we're doing this. And when you look at the fight on paper, honestly, sometimes people will give you grief if you make underdog calls because they're like, you don't really believe that. And I really do believe it, so if I'm an idiot, that's fine, right? That happens sometimes. But I look at Tony Ferguson and, people are saying this week, he could get the Darce. Yeah, he could get the Darce. I think he could just win this fight, right? Regardless, you look at Michael Chiesa, he hasn't been favored to win a UFC fight since 2019. And that fight was against Diego Sanchez. So for the same reason he's now favored against Tony, it was take out the trash. He's old. He's washed. He's retiring. Get him out of here. And frankly, he did his job in that fight. So, hey, hats off to him, right? But Diego Sanchez, guys, I honestly think was way worse than Tony Ferguson. In terms of what he was showing at that point in his career, he had a close fight with Kevin Lee on the regional, so hey, he still had something left to give, but we were just not seeing a very good version of him. I think that was Joshua Fabia in his corner for the Michael Chiesa fight, where he's talking about, we have a secret move that if Chiesa doesn't defend, he will die. Like, it's just a complete clown, right? So that version of Diego Sanchez couldn't get one over on Chiesa. Fair play. But I just look at, what Chiesa brings to the table, and he's a very nervous striker, in my view, on the feet. He's always been a bit skittish in those positions. I think he's actually susceptible to some of the things that Tony does well, which is Tony is going to go out there, and I can tell you, he's going to throw low kicks. He's going to try and throw some awkward straight punches with his chin right up in the air. And then when he gets close to people, he tries to throw uppercuts. And he can sometimes dip off to the sides doing that. Sometimes he just does it straight up with his chin here and just throws them. But guys, I can tell you, he's knocked down Justin Gaethje with those shots. He's landed those even in this streak of terrible losses. He's landed a few impactful strikes that hurt guys, right? He's won a couple rounds against these fighters. The problem ultimately has been putting together a complete 15 minutes, and he's going against these young guys. I mean, Paddy Pimblett just embarrassed Bobby Green in the first round, right? Tony Ferguson at least had the heart, the gumption to keep going out there fighting for the full 15 minutes. Yeah, he wasn't able to get one over on Paddy. Paddy's big, physical, cuts a lot of weight, right? He's on steroids, and Tony's 40. So it was tough. But when you look at this fight, it's not like there's a massive age gap. It's a small age gap. It's not like one guy's washed and the other guy's having a ton of success. Michael Chiesa hasn't won a fight in 3 years. He hasn't been favored to win a fight since 2019. So he's a very low-level UFC guy at this point by his own record, right? He's not favored in any of his fights. He goes out there, he loses most of them via submission in the first round. So he's a guy that is boom and bust. When he looks good, he looks very good. I bet him, by the way, against Neil Magny. I had that ticket, plus 118, Michael Chiesa. I was like, guys, Neil Magny can't grapple. He's not very strong physically. He's going to get horsed around. And so that is the downside for Tony Ferguson here. The bullish case for Michael Chiesa is he's cutting way more weight. So he's going to throw Tony around physically, and Tony is just too washed physically to do anything about it. But for me, I think of a guy in Michael Chiesa as a guy who, if one mistake happens, he will self-immolate. I've seen it happen multiple times against Vicente Luque. He's having the fight of his life. He takes his back. He's doing everything well. He falls over the top, head in. Oh, that's it. Darce choke, and it's over. Against Kevin Holland, he's out there. He's looking to land some shots in the feet. Kevin starts landing a couple uppercuts that make him uncomfortable, shoots from too far away. Thanks for playing, Darce choke, and we're all done. By the way, wrote up in my RotoGrinders article that you definitely should read, Kevin Holland by Darce choke in round 1. That was in the article. By Darce choke in round 1. I told you which one he's going to hit. So now I'm telling you that as a guy who's never lost a bet on Michael Chiesa, I think I've never made more money on one fighter than Kevin Holland, except maybe Tatsuro Taira. I think that this is another fight where, because he knows the calf kick, he knows the uppercut, he knows the Darce choke, Tony Ferguson is a live underdog.
I really wanted to say something about that, right? Like, because Chiesa is one of these guys that's like Anthony Smith now, right? Like, I look at him as the same exact mold. He's going to be put into fights where perceived you're going to win, or like, you could have a good spot against Tony Ferguson, who hasn't looked himself, but they're announcing. Like, they have outside jobs, right? They have real life jobs in the MMA world, right? He is not an announcer, right? Isn't he on color with like Karen Bryant and stuff like that?
Yeah, post-game shows and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, but so it can work both ways. But these types of guys, they want to continue to be around, because then they can be like, okay, well, they're still fighting active and they're winning fights in the UFC. It's just like Tony Ferguson, he literally has nothing to lose. Like, when you talk about house money plus, this is like definitely a world where he could surprise, and you nailed the other side of it, right? We are not saying that is 100% going to happen. What we're saying is, if Chiesa can muscle him down, there's a world where Chiesa puts up like 120 points in a decision, 30-27, hell, 30-26, 30-25 of just pure control time, even if he doesn't finish them. So I do think it's a very good fight because of the pace, unfortunately. What do you think about both of the guys traveling? Is that going to hurt both of them equally? or Tony Ferguson even
I
more?
don't know that it makes a huge difference. They're both professionals. They've had a million fights. I feel like they could fight anywhere, and it would be the same. But who knows? I could be wrong
Yeah,
about that.
yeah.
But that's
Well,
just
of course.
my take on it. I didn't read too much into that.
Of course, and we move on to the next fight of the night. That we have Davison Figueiredo versus Marlon Vera. We have Davison Figueiredo as the favorite, minus 145. Vera plus 125. Surface when I saw this, I went not necessarily the wrong person favored, just like a pick 'em, because Vera's just been that guy that's been on the cusp. Of course, last time out against Sean O'Malley. I feel like it's a somewhat of a quick turnaround. You talked about some of the guys down the card in March. He nearly was finished. He only ate 230 significant strikes in that fight. I worry about this fight for fantasy because you have the classic Marlon Vera, Cheeto Vera, that just does nothing for the first round and then picks it up. And I think it's on Davison, man. If Davison can pick up the pace and make Vera force him into some striking exchanges early, there might be something to be had here for fantasy relevance. Okay, so Vera's going to be 22%. I think he's got name value, right, Liam? But he also fits my favorite mold. Better inside the distance line than his opponent, right? I believe it is a plus 300 compared to a plus 600 for Figueiredo. That's why I think this is a trap fight. Like, I just think that there you go. Figueiredo, 12%. It's a trap when it comes to fantasy. That's what I'm going to say. What do you think? Same thing. There's a world where they just, 29-28, one guy wins, and you're like, oh God, they just scored 60 points because they just kickboxed.
So I think that the biggest path to scoring in this fight would be if Figueiredo is able to grapple Marlon Vera. And Vera is a guy that is he's got a lot of heart, he's got a lot of gumption, but when you see there's been times in the past he's just been neutralized by really good fighters. And I think of Jose Aldo as like a savvy championship level veteran who was probably at a suboptimal point in his career in terms of the weight class and everything else. And how did he beat Cheeto? If you remember that fight, he went out there in round one and he gave him the tour of the octagon because it's Jose Aldo, but also because Cheeto typically throws away the first round. So that's a tough guy to get behind from a fantasy standpoint. I would think over 3 rounds, it's like a guy who's going to punt one of them potentially. Okay, that's tough. But then additionally, right, he loses the first round on striking. Okay, they come back out for round 2. He beats up Jose Aldo. Great look. But then Jose Aldo's a smart guy and he's a champion. He said, okay, this is trending the wrong direction for me. So I can't strike with this guy no more because he has more durability. He's willing to get hit more. I'm not doing quite as much damage. He's landing hard on my face. So I need to do something different. And he came out in round 3. He put a body triangle in and he held it for 4 minutes and the fight was over. And Cheeto looked like he was so angry because he had no answers, right? He's just sitting there frustrated, like, damn, like, I wish he would fight me differently, but he had nothing he could do about it. And when you look at Davison Figueiredo, I think he had a similar, idea in his last fight, which was, yo, this striking exchanges aren't going as easy as I thought. Screw all this. And he just started taking him down, taking the back. He's been working with the Khabib camp. He's been working with those guys trying to shore up his grappling, trying to get to those positions, those takedowns easier. And we've seen a lot of times in mixed martial arts, the biggest letdown fight for people can often be when you go from a 5-round championship opportunity to a 3-round fight where you don't have the same kind of opportunity, you don't have the same lights on you, and instead now you're in a spot where, hey, you got to go out there against a championship level fighter who's going to look to probably take you down and impose their grappling on you when that's been a little bit of a deficiency for you throughout your career. So I always think that Marlon Vera's live. He's live later on in fights. He's got knockout power. We've seen that from him. But a lot of his opponents he's knocked out are up on the age spectrum, even higher than Figueiredo. And I don't know that as many of his opponents have had the same kind of grappling pedigree that Figueiredo does in terms of his submission wins in the UFC or his ability to get the back take like we saw in his last fight. So I don't expect him to submit Cheeto Vera, but I do think he could ride out 2 rounds of back control against Cheeto or get on top of him in the full guard. The thing about Cheeto is he's really dangerous if he's in full guard, but anything past that, and he's got to be much more defensive. So I think that as long as Figueiredo comes correct with his passing and his takedowns, he has a fight that he could win on his hands here. But I do think his run at bantamweight is coming to an end shortly, but Cheeto is just coming off of a tough spot where, honestly, man, he took life-changing damage in that fight. I'm surprised he's getting rushed back out there this quickly. And, he's a tough guy, so I'll never put it past him, right? He's literally been impossible to finish, but you worry a little bit for a guy like Cheeto with all the damage he took in his last fight. He didn't go down. He's got all the heart in the world, but he absorbed so much damage over the course of those 5 rounds. You wonder if he'll ever be the same fighter.
Figueiredo is like one of those guys that was a champion in the UFC, right? And it's like you feel like Vera's been the one that like he's got the name value, but like the books are sharp. They know they have a minus 150 for a reason, Figueiredo. One guy's stock trending upwards, especially in the division, and Vera's trending down. I just don't know if the ceiling is here. Like you nailed it, right? Like if Vera even wins a round, I think that this is probably not going to be great for fantasy, right? And it's really sucks because it's 7,800 and 8,400. So like there's a world where 70 points, 75 points is okay on this slate if everything else goes right.
And I think there's a lot of worlds in which like a Cheeto Vera win looks like him losing 7 minutes of this fight, and then all of a sudden he wins. Do you know what I mean? Like that, that feels like the path more often than not for Cheeto here. So I think for his career moving forward, what would say he's a different fighter, a fighter we have to take more seriously, is if he wins the first round and like does a lot of damage early, because you can't be a championship level fighter giving away the first round. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and what I know it's a flyweight, but a lot of the losses, of course, to Moreno were deeper into the fight, third round. Step on the gas though if you're Cheeto, man. Get going. There's another guy right here, right? We talk about Cheeto being a slow starter. The co-main event has, to me, I'm still surprised about that last fight. Nurmagomedov is like the slowest starter of all, man. That was like did nothing. He did nothing. The line was creeping down and then just murked. 82 strikes, a knockdown in that win last time out against Tricoli. He gets rewarded with the co-main event against Michal Oleksiejczuk. He's the favorite, of course. Magomedov minus 230. Come back on Oleksiejczuk a plus 195. Mikey O, main card Mikey O. That's what I'm going to give him a nickname because Liam, they keep trotting him out here. The Kevin Holland experience, Michel Pereira, and you can see they're going with Charles Magomedov. My problem though is that he's somewhat, it seems checked out. Like I don't know if he's like has aspirations of being a champion or what. Like what are we doing here with him? Because like his path to victory would be to win that first round. Hopefully win a second or third round and get a decision win. I don't know if he's going to finish them. And for fantasy-wise, am I wrong? I mean, I feel like Magomedov did absolutely nothing in that first round. He got controlled against the cage, if you remember, against Trocoli. I'm trying to pull it up. I'm stalling. For almost 5 minutes of control time against the cage for Trocoli. Like, that's not a good sign of things to come. I just don't think Mikey O is the guy to kind of push the grappling or control or slow that pace down.
Yeah, I actually bet Tricoli in that last fight. And in part, the reason being is he's grappler first in terms of what he brings to the table. I believe he's his jiu-jitsu black belt. He was only 33 years of age. He had a huge height and reach advantage. So he was 6'5". He had an 80-inch reach, and I thought all those things were going to help him in the wrestling and the grappling. Frankly, he gassed out pretty bad in that fight. I think he took it on short notice. He was supposed to fight somebody else a week and a half prior. It's kind of hard to peak for 2 fights, within that short period of time when you don't even go through with the first fight, right? It's just like little weight cut, then, a little bit of, am I coming? Am I going? What am I doing here? 2 weeks later, you take a fight. Maybe you just perform suboptimally, but I thought he showed what the path was early, right? Like push this guy against the fence, try and take him down, try and get a hold of him. But now Shera's taking on somebody who's much smaller in Michal Oleksiejczuk. Oleksiejczuk's a tiny guy. For the division, it's ironic because, he's fought up at 205 and he did fine in that weight class. Now he's down at 185 and he's still small for the division. He's going to be 1 inch reach advantage here, but he's giving up 2 inches in height to the taller Shera Magomedov. I think that for Oleksiejczuk, he didn't look bad against Kevin Holland in the early going, but he's just predictably easy to submit for anybody with a competent ground game. And I think that Nurmagomedov is not really proven to be dangerous on the mat, right? He has no wins by submission, and he's taking on somebody in Michal Oleksiejczuk, who the vast majority of the losses in his career, 6 out of 8 losses in his career, were by submission. So you do think to yourself, man, this guy probably has a path, and it's probably fantasy relevant if he wins, right? And the reason I say that is because, number one, we don't know what Shera's takedown defense looks like, except to say it's not great, right? We don't think he's very high level on the ground. He got taken down by Bruno Silva, of all people. So you think to yourself, okay, if he could get taken down and potentially held down by Oleksiejczuk in this fight, okay, that's a high-scoring path for Oleksiejczuk. The other thing is if Oleksiejczuk maximizes his normal win condition, knockout, bing, bang, boom, first round, then wow, like now he's scoring really optimally and people probably aren't going to click him. So I think that makes him an interesting underdog. But ultimately, all the stuff surrounding it is the reason I can't get behind him. He used to train at a real camp. He used to have ambitions. He used to be training hard and trying to do all these things. And it seemed like he's kind of checked out mentally on his career and himself. Basically said, hey, I'm a UFC fighter. If I lose this fight, I'm retired from MMA. I'm not going to go fight somewhere else. He's a guy that's lost a lot of fights inside the distance recently. He struggled to make it in fights that go long. And the wins that he's had, most of them have not aged great in the UFC. So I do think of Oleksiejczuk as a guy who's fun. He's got a purple belt. He throws power shots. But I think the reason they kept him around is kill or be killed style. I think they want Shera to put a beating on this guy. He's going to be in movies. He's going to do all these things. Now they're saying he can fight in the U.S. when he wasn't supposed to be able to before. So if they're trying to make a star out of him, hey, Oleksiejczuk's been the guy that people get finishes over. And I think they're trying to set up Shera for a finish. He's only been put away with strikes once, and I believe it was pre-UFC. But if there's anybody who's going to go out there and try and make it happen again, I would think it's going to be Shera, who's not going to look to go to the ground with this guy. He's going to try and hit him to the body with kicks. He's going to try and hit him upstairs with those. And honestly, if Oleksiejczuk hasn't been preparing like a professional, he might gas out in this fight. I think the crowd's going to be behind Shera, but I don't believe in Shera long term. I'm with you. He's a guy that can be taken down. He can be exploited. There's a reason they ain't giving him wrestlers and grapplers right off the rip, right? They're giving him purple belt Oleksiejczuk, who's been submitted 6 times. So
yeah, it really is that. It's pace, right? We want to buy into high-paced fights. That finish equity is there too. That's the funny game that we try to piece together for you guys on these podcasts and on that content, right? On the content side of things, you also have underdogs. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw Mr. Squirrel Patrol behind the paywall, and I know nothing yet. He hasn't posted it. If Oleksiejczuk might be one of those guys, just because he has a path, and all he needs is 2 rounds. Let's be honest, right? It's just an OV in Abu Dhabi. I think we know who would be. It wouldn't be surprising if it's a close fight and the nod goes directly to Sarah. We move to the main event, though, where we see Umar Nurmagomedov versus Corey Sandhagen. Umar minus 300. Come back on Sandhagen, a plus 250 range. That's what I say. Because when this thing's competitive, Corey's equity goes up a lot. 30% ownership's a little bit surprising. We look at Umar's ownership, it's 50%. Yeah, first click Umar makes a lot of sense. People want that 5 rounds. We've seen Sandhagen kind of crumble to overwhelming pressure, and the Aljamain Sterling is like what comes to mind. I'm not putting Umar in that category, but there's definitely a way where he could just steamroll right away. I was somewhat hoping that Umar would be lower owned. Of course not, Liam. Not on a slate with 5 rounds to work with. Sandhagen's side of things, I don't really rate the Rob Font. I don't know how do we even evaluate that fight? 7 takedowns, really not a lot of strikes either because he didn't need them. I don't know if there's wrestling and grappling back and forth. I think that means it's good for fantasy. Clearly, I think it's going to be one of those. You're going to need a piece of either one of these guys. I don't see a world where they both score well. I see it being one guy or the other. Do you somewhat agree with that? And which side are you eyeing? And is 50% Umar a little bit surprising?
Marginally, but not really. I mean, you give a Nurmagomedov, an opportunity, then people are going to definitely click that name. Listen, I like and respect Umar. I think he's a good fighter, but watching back the Beksot fight, there's at least room for concern, coming into this fight because Beksot is a good fighter, and I rate him. I thought he was going to give somewhat of a challenge to Umar, but he seemed to almost knock him out in the first few exchanges, right? He landed a big shot. Umar dropped back to both knees, and Beksot got a little excited, ran in to a crackdown, and then we've just seen Umar in terms of the wrestling and the grappling. I really don't think there's much you could say negative about it. It's very, very good. It's very persistent. He'll go back to it over and over. I think his wrestling is better than his grappling. Just when you look at how he's able to get to the legs and then take people down, he's sensational. But I think the problem with his game so far has been a lack of finishing instincts. He wasn't able to put Beksot away when he had advantage positions. There was a few times, in fact, where he let Beksot get out, like multiple times, let him scramble back up to his feet, let him create separation, build back up, go to the mount, all these different things. And if there's one thing we know about Corey Sandhagen, it's that he does have good cardio. Right. He's a guy that's been conditioned to fight for 5 rounds. He trains at altitude in Colorado. He does have those elements where, hey, if you're not able to put him away, things might get dicey for you the longer it goes. And I've told people before, there's a reason wrestling matches are 6 minutes, right? You could only do that stuff for so long. And we saw Umar in his last fight. After the fight, he's doing the interview. He's having a real breathe of it. And there's no shame in that, right? He went out there and spent his energy. Beksot made him earn it. And I think the exact same thing will happen here against Corey. Right? Corey's not going to give it up for free. He's going to make you earn it. I think against Aljamain Sterling, that was an aberration. Personally, I believe that. Now, that could all change. If Umar goes out there and cleans him up in the first round on Saturday, all you could say is, hey, hats off to Umar. This guy is the truth. And that's always a possibility. But I truly believe that Corey in that fight was not intense enough. And you see Aljamain Sterling pacing, ready to go. He's ready to rumble. He wants to fight. He wants to kill. He's going out there with a game plan. I'm going to get to this guy's back, choke him out, and get my title shot. And meanwhile, Corey Sandhagen's like doing his laundry. He's thinking about his shopping list, all the things that we talk about when a guy should be thinking about the cage fight. He's thinking about everything else. And he went out there and he got bamboozled. Before he even knew the fight started, the fight was over. He's having a tap. He's getting choked unconscious. It was brutal. But I actually have heard him in interviews say, like, I learned from that. I will never start a fight lackadaisical like that again. I'm coming out ready, eyes open, ready to go, focused. And I think we've actually seen that from him in the ensuing fights. He's never beaten a championship level fighter. And I do think Umar is going to be of that trajectory eventually. But Umar hasn't had that many challenges since he got to the UFC, right? Since he got to the UFC, his toughest fight, I would argue, has been Beksot. Raoni Barcelos was past his prime and didn't get a full 15-minute accounting of him in that fight. Brian Boom Kelleher, with all due respect, has been finished in the first round. A lot of his recent fights don't really take a tremendous amount away from that. And I would say the Said Yakub Kakramanov fight pre-UFC tells you more about where his upside is. He's clearly a talented fighter. But I just think that Corey Sandhagen, over 5 rounds, a very tough, experienced, savvy veteran, it's not an easy click on Umar in that spot, because I do think he's probably going to have to earn this over the course of 5 hard rounds. I haven't seen it enough from him in terms of finishing instincts to say he's going to put Sandhagen away. But I do want to just note, Sandhagen, I mentioned it right off the rip when we started talking, has a bad habit of giving his back in these grappling exchanges, which a lot of guys can't punish you for, which is why he does it. But when you go against somebody that can punish you for it, it can be a real problem. We've seen, Corey give up his back to TJ Dillashaw. We also saw him rip TJ Dillashaw's knee apart. So it's not like you could do these things for free, but he just gives up bad positions, bad optics at times. He's a little bit too accepting of negative positions, and Umar's never that, right? If there's one thing you could say about the Nurmagomedovs, they do not accept bad positions, period, point blank. They will get back up. They will work to their feet. They will try and get on top. And Corey's been taking guys down in his recent fights. He's been using a lot of wrestling and grappling offensively. I think that's out the window here. I think he's going to have to use his striking. I think he's got a chance to land a big flying knee, to use his effective offense with the hands. But I think outside of that, in the grappling phase, I definitely favor Umar here. So fun fight, good scrap. I think definitely the toughest test to date for Umar. I would make him the favorite here, but I'd make this line a little bit closer. I don't know that he's proven enough at this stage of the game, whereas Corey Sandhagen's taken rounds off of the elite fighters in the division already to this point. So
Ex-
great fight. I'm excited for this one.
Oh yeah, it's an amazing fight. And I almost obviously completely different stylistically look at this one as like the Whitaker versus Alexerov, but Whitaker being, I think Whitaker's way better than Sandhagen, but it's like Alexerov was turned back and I think it shocked some people, right? And
myself included as a Whitaker hater.
yeah, I mean, it's like one of those situations where it's like if Sandhagen won, I don't think I would be as surprised, but I still would be like, all right, well, there's a lot of things going against you, and you can see what the UFC is trying to do. That's at the end of the day, they do fights for a reason. Yes, they need to give us the best fights, but yeah, it happens. What we like to do here on the Ground and Pound is look at the highest owned fighters, look at the lowest owned fighters, and kind of go back and forth with, what are we looking at on the board here? I mean, unfortunately, I told you our guy Bedoya, I knew it, he would be high owned, going to be a top 5 or 6 fighter on this slate. That's one of the underdogs that has a ceiling, right? Has a built-in floor with volume. You talked about even perhaps he's been trying to go for takedowns at that other weight class. Fernandez is just going to be one of those guys that's somewhat overowned. Like there's traps. There's traps here. Those are your 3 traps. Now, if Brenner wins, I think it's going to be great because he's always going to be going forward, right? He's going to be scoring points and bunches. That's what he does. We talked about Yaya. I don't think the ceiling is super high for Yaya, but I wouldn't be surprised by it. I think that he's got more win equity than a ceiling. And Shara, yeah, we've seen him get there already, right? Against Trocali, he got there. Not a ton of surprises there for the higher owned. I guess Chiesa, we talked about that one. Highest price fighter usually comes in a little bit higher. Liam, people like to click that safety of the biggest price guy for some reason. Your guy, Marzukhanov, thoughts on that? 30% kind of off the upper echelon. I figured he'd be higher owned.
I think the one that I want to talk about from the highest percentage owned category would be a Joel Alvarez, and the reason I bring that name up is because he does have some finish equity. We know that, but I talked about if you go win by win, his best win in the UFC is Mark Diakese, and that's not a great win, right? So I just think to myself, could he possibly be overvalued on strength of competition? He's got good losses, but he got pretty clearly beat by Demiris Magulov standing. And then he got absolutely obliterated by Arman Sarukian on the ground. And we've seen other guys get up from Arman Sarukian. So it's not like he does that to everybody. He literally just did whatever he wanted. The guy's got 0% takedown defense. So if you've got a guy with 0% takedown defense at 43% owned, what could go wrong? I don't know. He could get taken down. And I do think that Elves Brenner has shown the wrestling to put the fight on the ground. I think he's shown the BJJ core competencies to not get submitted with the guillotine. So personally, that's how I feel about it. Obviously, Alvarez is a dangerous fighter. You don't want to make a habit of just fading, dangerous killers on the ground. But I think of a guy like Brenner as a proven finisher in his own right. He's actually won decisions, which Alvarez has never done. And you look at a guy like Brenner, he could get takedowns. He's had several UFC fights of his own. He's done well as an underdog. There's just a lot to like for me about a guy like that. And he's not very high owned, right? He's very low owned on the slate. So, yeah, a guy like that I think
all these guys. When you go by low owned, we have talked about virtually every single one.
And I think that the ones that I want to highlight here, Davison Figueiredo, favored to win the fight, has the grappling upside, you'd think, of the two. And yet he's got 12% ownership. Nobody wants to click that side. Tony Ferguson, everybody's thinking he's Darce or bust here. I'm believing personally that this could be a 29-28 decision that he wins, which at this ownership would still probably bust the field. I think that it could be a, Tony Ferguson goes out there and lands a big uppercut and Michael Chiesa quits. Like all of those seem in play to me. So yeah, I think maybe the Darce or maybe something else. And Tony said that his plan for this fight, I listened to his interview. He was like, I hope that he did a lot of cardio because I'm going to push a pace. I'm going to throw a lot of strikes. I'm going to try and make this guy quit and give up. Count me in because that's the way you beat Chiesa. Either throw a lot of strikes and make him quit or get him into grappling scenarios, make him make one mistake, and he self-immolates, guys. He's a person that, in my humble opinion, gets down on themselves. They make a mistake, they're a perfectionist. They say, how did I make this mistake? And then they're thinking about it while they're getting tapped out. So that, for me, is the ultimate Michael Chiesa self-immolation of the past is I go out there, have some success, fall over the top, and get submitted. And it's possible it happens again this weekend. But I just think that if it's a competitive stand-up fight, do you really favor Michael Chiesa minus 700 to beat Tony Ferguson if they're boxing? I mean, I don't. So
You don't need a lot out of either Ferguson or Yaya at those price tags, especially for the salary relief. I like your little making note of Figueiredo, because usually you see a favorite, they're not going to be sub 15 to 20%. Nobody wants a piece of the heavyweight, it looks like, right? Like, it's funny, right? Highest weight class, big finish percentage. Maybe people don't want to go there. And the boneheaded, no offense to him, Menafield, obviously a low owned play as well. Final takeaway, are we good here? We're going to move on to next week.
Yeah, I reckon we move on to next week. And we hope for, another great night of fights. So I think it's going down on ABC this week. It's going down a little bit earlier. A couple notes there. I'm going to try and have my article done a little bit earlier as a result. But yeah, peace, love, and chicken grease. God bless.
Yeah, make sure you check out all Liam's stuff on Twitter. He also has the YouTube show. That's going to be a fantastic thing to check out if you have some time before lock on Saturday. Well, it's not morning, it's noon. I know maybe I might be waking up at noon if I could, but there will be a pre-show as well, actually at 11, I believe, for crunch time before lock. Next week, though, 12 fights. Tubora Spivak 2. The fight nobody wanted, but it's here. That's something that we will be going after. I'm more happy for Kinoshita versus Parsons. Get your popcorn ready for that fight. But follow us on Twitter at H3Buddha. Follow Liam at LiamPicksFights, and we will see you guys next week.